I'm Johnny Green, and you're watching Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're talking about the beliefs and motives of abolitionists in the abolition era. There had always been people who were against slavery in America, and these people were mostly concentrated in New England. But as we got further into the 19th century, the abolitionist movement started to gain more traction. There were two main reasons that people were against slavery, the first of which was religious. Evangelical Protestants in the North always believed that slavery as a national practice was a sin, and that it was the moral duty of all citizens to work actively to abolish it. They believed that slaves should be freed and sent back to their homeland of Africa. Quakers were another religious group that were very active in the abolitionist era because they had views of equality for all people. They were also labeled as religious dissenters by people who were in favor of slavery, and they were seen as dangerous fanatics because they wanted everybody to be free, just as the Declaration of Independence said. The screen! Me from the past, let me finish before you ask any irrelevant questions. The motives for abolition in the Manifest Destiny era stemmed mostly religiously, morally, and partially economically. The people who had moral reasons for being abolitionists believed that it was a, quote, moral imperative to end sinful practices, and that it was in each person's responsibility to uphold God's will in society. And what this meant was that many Christians were abolitionists because of religious reasons, as well as tying them with their moral reasons as well. So many people wanted to go to heaven, and they believed that by helping slaves reach their freedom, this would help them reach heaven. Also, many people around the country who were abolitionists just believed that slavery was immoral and evil overall, and they just wanted to help the slaves out of the goodness of their hearts. Also, many of the motives and beliefs of abolitionists during the time period were influenced by William Lloyd Garrison's The Liberator, and this piece of literature was so influential in driving the abolition force. Unfortunately, there were also an economic intentions for some people to be abolitionists, and this was bittersweet because eventually it did help the abolitionist movement and lead to the eradication of slavery in America, but it was for ambiguously moral reasons. There were monetary rewards for freeing slaves, and some people, some traders would free their slaves because the reward that came from freeing them would have been more than what they believed they would get in a slave auction in a market. But regardless of the reason, the most important impact of the beliefs and motives of abolitionists was to get slavery out of America and have it be completely eradicated, and that was their motive and their driving force behind the abolitionist movement. So now on to our next topic.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Green, and now we'll be talking about the role of media in the abolitionist movement. Initially, only the wealthy could afford newspapers, and they were the main source of media output. However, newspapers eventually became less expensive and were more widespread. Posters and pictures were used to reach the illiterate audiences, and James Gordon Bennett took advantage of new papermaking and printing techniques to make newspapers rely on vast circulation, which in turn caused newspaper prices to drastically drop. And in 1833, the first penny newspaper appeared. Penny newspapers were not only affordable, but also revolutionized the format and marketing of newspapers. These newspapers wrote about crime, scandal, politics, and finances. William Garrison launched his newspaper called The Liberator in 1831. He quickly became the most popular and controversial white abolitionist out there. And he wanted immediate emancipation. He gained support from a lot of the black population, and 3/4 of his readership was black initially. His newspaper influenced many to convert to support anti-slavery.
Hello, I'm Jack Green, and today we're going to be talking about Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin. First off, who is Harriet Beecher Stowe? Well, this woman was born in Connecticut and was the son of a liberal preacher who told his followers to go out in the community and fix any problems that you saw. And that is exactly what his daughter, Harriet Beecher Stowe, did when she wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin. She did this in the support of her husband, Reverend Calvin Ellis Stowe, who told her that she should write even though women at this time had no influence in society. She had a large influence on the first acts of feminism in this country, so much so that President Lincoln said, "You're the little woman who wrote the book that started the Great War." Mr. Green, but wait. Me from the past, stop talking before you embarrass yourself. How did this book contribute so much to the abolitionist era? Well, let's look at our historical document. Hey, it's the original Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. Well, let me just give you a quick synopsis for those of you who haven't read this. So, the novel starts off in a slave auction where a mother and son are cruelly being split up. Luckily, though, they are sold together, and when they get to their plantation, they run away using the Underground Railroad up to Canada where it is free. Uncle Tom, who was another slave that was sold during this time, unfortunately did not make it out and was shackled and sent to Louisiana, one of the most cruel slave ports there is. On the boat, however, though, he saves a rich white man's daughter and becomes a coachman, so he lives a little bit of a better life. What's happening with Eliza and Harry, the mother and son? They have been taken in by a Quaker who is a Christian that is against the slavery in the South. So luckily they were doing pretty well. Well, as soon as Tom's owner dies, the wife cruelly sells him back into slavery, where he is put on another terrible plantation where he is almost left to die. Luckily, though, at the end of the book, Eliza and her son come back to save him, and there's a happy ending. Unfortunately, not all slavery had a happy ending like in the book. That is what Harriet Beecher Stowe really wanted to prove when she wrote this novel. The moral of the story was to say that slavery was terrible in all of its forms, from the Underground Railroad to fugitives to plantations to anything that was there. But she thought that it was something that Christians had to protest, and since she was a woman and couldn't preach in this society, this was her outlet. 500,000 copies of this book were sold in the abolition era, and originally it was a newspaper, but this book played a great role in slavery, in the abolition era of Manifest Destiny. So,
hi, I'm John Jacob Green, and you're watching Crash Course.
Okay, so our first person for personalities is Theodore Parker, and he was a vocal abolitionist and a Unitarian minister. He also helped free the kidnapped slave Anthony Burns and used his great vocal skills to help the abolitionist movement all over the world. He was very important to this movement. The next person we have today is Wendell Phillips. He was one of the most hard workers of all the abolitionists. He devoted a lot of time, and even his marriage, to making sure the abolitionist movement got spread across the world. He also worked with Garrison to end slavery and make the awareness known. He was a really hard worker that really changed the face of the abolitionist movement.
Our next person is Frederick Douglass. He is probably one of the most well-known African-American abolitionists to live. He was a very powerful speaker and writer who wrote narratives that compelled people to abolish slavery. He is the figurehead of the abolitionist movement and is still considered very important today.
Our next character for the day is William Lloyd Garrison. He was a well-known abolitionist that was involved in many anti-slavery societies. He was also the publisher of the famous book, The Liberator. He believed that everyone was equal, and he used his beliefs to share his views on the abolitionist movement. Our next person for today is Elijah Lovejoy. He was a person who believed strongly in his beliefs and would do anything to defend him. He wrote many controversial editorials on slavery that made many mobs threaten him. He even died defending his beliefs. He proved to be a loyal subject to the movement and would do anything he could to defend the abolitionist movement. Our next person today is Horace Greeley. He was a very important key player in the abolitionist movement. He devoted almost all his life to social reform and was heavily involved in politics for the abolitionist movement. He influenced many people through his journalism. Although he was very important in the abolitionist movement, he lost in the 1872 election to Grant, but furthered his views and beliefs through his journalism. So last but not least, for our characters, we have Harriet Tubman. She's perhaps one of the most famous runaway slaves, who also helped other slaves escape through the Underground Railroad. She was known to be very aggressive and devious, which helped her successfully move many slaves from slavery without getting caught. She is looked up to today and considered a role model for many other women to stand up and do what they believe in. She is a hero of the abolitionist movement.
Hello, I am Wendell Phillips, and today I am proclaiming my protest for slavery in the abolitionist era. I have a few things to put in a time capsule that hopefully, about 155 years from now, people will see. First, I have Uncle Tom's Cabin, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe, to protest the horrors of slavery. Next, I have Quaker Oats, farmed by the Quakers, who were nice Christians in the South that helped slaves live with them. Next, I have a political cartoon representing the Fugitive Slave Act, which states that any runaway slaves in the North must be returned. And finally, I have a self-portrait of myself currently participating in No Shave November. Hopefully it will catch on in the future. I am Wendell Phillips. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Harriet Tubman, and I, like my good friend Wendell Phillips, or Wendy as I like to call him, support the abolition movement in all across America. I helped many slaves escape to their freedom through the Underground Railroad, and today I will be putting a picture of myself with my family into this time capsule, hoping for the future of America, for all people to be free.
Hello, I'm Theodore Parker. I'm a transgenders Unitarian minister. By the time you're seeing this, I hope slavery has been abolished. Ah, what a nasty sin it is. I was going to put saltwater taffy in the time capsule, but I ate it already. Sorry. God bless.
I'm William Lloyd Garrison, and I am the publisher of The Liberator. Today I am putting some cotton to represent the suffering of the slaves into this time capsule. I'm also putting a picture of me and my lovely wife to represent how beautiful she is. I am against slavery and hope that in 2015 it is over and everyone is free.
Born in Connecticut in 1800 and raised in Ohio, John Brown perceived slavery as a sin against God and became inspired to revolt against slavery when he attended an abolition conference in Cleveland in 1837. He partook in anti-slavery rebellions such as the Potawatomi Creek Massacre in 1856, where he and 7 others armed themselves with rifles, knives, and broadswords. They entered the pro-slavery town of Potawatomi Creek and stormed the houses of his enemies. This set off a brutal guerrilla warfare in Kansas. Brown had confided more information about the raid to Frederick Douglass than to anyone else. However, Douglass refused to aid Brown in the Harper's Ferry raid. Brown congregated a small effort of 16 whites and 5 blacks at a farmhouse outside of Harper's Ferry, Virginia. He and his men cut telegraph wires east and west of the town, leaving 3 men to guard the farmhouse. He and his men stormed Harper's Ferry and quickly seized the arsenal and armory. They exchanged gunfire with surrounding militia on October 16, 1859.
So now you're probably thinking, now what? Well, in the course of John Brown's raid, 10 men were killed, some escaped, and some, like John Brown, were captured and hung. John Brown was tried by the state of Virginia for treason and for murder. His courageous acts were greatly admired by the North, and church bells chimed out on the day of his execution. Songs and paintings were also created in his honor. The raid was influential in convincing Northern abolitionists that moral support would not be enough and that direct action was more necessary. Brown was turned into an instant martyr. I'm Joe Green, and you're watching Crash Course. Thanks for watching!